we're late. There was a party at the doll factory. It's Pepito's birthday.
Really?
Yeah. So, she wanted to meet in the cemetery. That's not, like, foreboding at all.
Am I the only one that sees this shirt?
No. Oh, it's my niece's soccer team, 8 and under. I checked their scores online, and I... What? They're in the playoffs.
What do you have on her?
Besides a pant-busting crush, her company file is blank. CIA has a standing kill order on her. As does Hamas, Sinn Féin. Pretty much everyone with the exception of Peter wants this chick Amsgrave.
Hey, think you're thinking clear on this? Huh? Because every time you mess up, it's because of a woman.
Name one time that
Amber.
Amber wasn't the problem. Amber's husband was the problem.
Amber's husband wasn't the one who shot
He
you.
was only in the leg.
What about Emma?
Emma doesn't count. I didn't sleep with Emma.
No, because she put a bomb in your car.
All right, I admit. That did take a little romance out of the relationship.
Yeah, now this chick shows up, and what's her name, Aisha, and, well, she burns down our hotel.
I'm clear, Roke.
Well, you better be, because I ain't getting killed by no girl.
It's been a long time since anyone called me a girl.
Welcome to the Superhero Cinephiles podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine, and welcoming a new guest today, but who's another connection from a recent guest we've had on, and that is Ariel Ortiz. Ariel, how you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me on.
Well, thanks for coming on. I was so you do a podcast with Derek McDuff, I believe, right?
Yes, who was recently on this show talking about Spider-Man 2.
Spider-Man 2, yeah.
And yeah. And so yeah, we have a company called Undercast Company, and our flagship podcast is the Underrated podcast. And besides that, where we just that podcast actually we discuss films that are considered underrated, underappreciated, or those that have just slipped under the radar and passed most people by. Besides that podcast, I do have my own podcast called You've Never Seen ? And that's a podcast where I kind of like take people or somebody else guides me through a movie that's considered a part of pop culture or cinematic history.
Mm-hmm.
And we discuss it after myself or somebody else watches it for the first time. Yeah, it was just recent. I was kind of a little late to this recording a bit because I was watching The Thing for the first time for my Halloween episode. So yeah.
Okay, cool. So I had said this to Derek too, and I'm going to say it to you as well because I want to put you both on the spot. If you guys ever do Alien 3 on Underrated, you got to have me on because I think that is definitely an underrated film.
Oh no, yeah, I've never seen actually the original Alien movies, but I do know the concept of Alien 3. Like I kind of like I've seen the Netflix series, the movies that made us. So like Alien was one of them.
Yeah.
And then they kind of like talked about the subsequent movies and stuff like that. And so I do know like the concept of Alien 3 at least, but yeah, definitely just based on the concept seems like a underrated film as well.
That's one you should probably have on your own show then too, is Alien, because that's a classic.
I know. Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of like, definitely considering that I've never watched The Thing. There's definitely a lot of sci-fi 80s movies that I've never watched, or, 70s, 80s movies. Yeah.
So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about you. So what was kind of your entry point into the world of like nerdy shit in general, basically?
Yeah. Actually, I've always like grown up with like kind of like cinema nerd kind of stuff. Like we just were discussing on our Underrated podcast, like we're doing a series of at least of this recording of old movies and stuff like that from like the 50s, 60s. And that's some of the movies I actually grew up with. So it wasn't until like we were talking about those movies I was like, oh, I do kind of have like a interesting like upbringing with movies because of watching all these old movies. And yeah, but it wasn't until like the I didn't get into full nerd, I guess you can say, nerd mode, like until I would say my freshman year of high school, because that is the time when I started watching like television shows, like a lot more like television shows that are, you know, are ongoing thing, not just like the kids shows that have like a one and done episode and stuff like that you could weave in and out of. But yeah, so it wasn't until then, and my first kind of like, I would equate my first kind of like entry points into nerdom were actually the TV show Heroes.
Oh,
which
okay.
is also an underrated, in my opinion. I love Heroes. Like, I mean, I do owe a lot because it made me into a nerd. And then yeah, like Scrubs as well. Like those are
Oh
my
God,
two,
I
like,
love
kind of
Scrubs. Scrubs is like one of my it's like my comfort food.
Yeah, exactly. And then yeah, so from before that, like I would have like just the most nerd kind of things I had were like, I loved the Ghostbusters, especially I grew up at the time when the Extreme Ghostbusters aired, which I don't know.
That's an underrated. Yeah, that's an underrated
right.
show. I remember watching that too. That was
it's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah, and it was pretty dark too.
Oh yeah, the first episode, even like with the whole thing. I could, if you ever want me back on that, because that's like kind of like a limited series, sadly, because it didn't last. I think it lasts maybe 2 years,
something like that.
I would definitely talk about that one as well.
Okay, we'll have to put a pin in that. Maybe we'll come back to that at some point. So we're talking, you know, basically about this podcast focuses on superhero type stuff. So what about superhero? Well, I guess Heroes then would have been your gateway drug into that. But what about, like, have you ever been into any of the comic books or anything like that, or is it just like movies and TV for you?
So yeah, my entry into that was like, yeah, about exactly the same time as that, or maybe a little bit earlier. I did like get my first comic book, which is actually from Albertsons, and it was, you know how they had the newsstand kind of section. It was like these like small graphic novels of comic books, and yeah, the first comic that I ever bought and read was Fantastic Four. I don't even know what series or anything like that, but it was it was like a early 2000s kind of like, so it was like, yeah, Fantastic Four. I think that it was an Ultimate Spider-Man, and then the Marvel Encyclopedia. So yeah, for the most part, for when it comes to comics, I switch around. I think I'm diverse with it. I do read Marvel and DC, but for my entry into like superheroes, in my first superhero movie that like I could kind of like clearly remember, at least, that I kind of gravitated towards, was a movie that you guys covered called The Spirit, and that was going to be my first choice when coming on. And then I was looking at the episodes that you've done, I'm like, damn, he's done this Spirit. I'm like, of all things. But
The Spirit, awesome. that was one of the, like, for the most part on this show, you know, we try to be positive about a lot of the movies, but every so often we get a movie that we just can't really find much to be positive about, and The Spirit was one of those.
I could have brought the positivity. I love that movie. I love Gabriel Mock.
So you're the one.
Yes, I am the one. Yeah, I think I watched it. I watched it in theaters, and then yeah, like I it was one of the, going back to Albertsons, one of the ones that I rented a couple of times, and I do own it. Did
you actually listen to the episode we did on The Spirit?
I haven't been able to. Okay. I need to, but I'm
so like, oh, it's probably good that you decided to come on the show before listening to that episode.
I'm okay. I'm fine. I'm used to being an outlier sometimes when it comes to pop culture opinions. But yeah, and then you know, with Heroes, and then the miraculous MCU came out, and from then I've just been I love the MCU. Like, it's my bread and butter when it comes to things sometimes. But then also at the same time, Arrow came out, and that one, that television show has essentially like been one of the cornerstones of my life. It kind of like led me into like doing some cosplaying and stuff like that, and like actually like connecting with more people through my love of Arrow and the Arrowverse, and so yeah, so that's like kind of like the keystones of my nerdism, you could say.
Awesome.
Was those things.
Yeah, I was big on the Arrowverse for a while, and then after Crisis, it seems to have just kind of like it feels like it's going out on kind of a fizzle.
Well, it is essentially going on and fizzle, and then but
Yeah.
one of the best things that came out of it, besides Arrow itself, which is an incredible like run of a show
Mhm.
in itself, but also like currently I would definitely recommend Superman and Lois.
Yes,
It's
yeah.
such an incredible series. Like,
Although they've decoupled that from the Arrowverse now because
essentially it's like I would say that's kind of like more like an Elseworlds, because you
Right,
do have
right.
a John Diggle.
there's
Yeah,
a John
but-
Diggle and
Mhm.
in the when Sam Lane said that, you know, Superman's the only hero on this earth, he did make mention to like, you know, there have been
But,
other Earths and all that
yeah.
kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I love that show. I just finished the second season about a few weeks ago, actually.
Yeah.
And yeah.
We'll see what happens with the unfortunate, you know, things with not just the whole Papa Warner, but also with the recasting of one of the sons.
Yeah, I saw that recently as well.
Mhm.
And I know there wasn't much information about why he didn't come back, but I've heard that he had some he's had some mental health issues in the past too.
Yeah.
So I hope it's, you know, nothing too serious.
Mhm.
So that was disappointing to hear about that, because I really liked him in the show.
That show's so perfectly acted.
Yeah.
And like Tyler Hoechlin, man, like you would not know from that, you know, the guy from Teen Wolf would be like
I know.
the perfect Clark Kent Superman.
Yeah. My one criticism of him is that I wish we get to see him more in like the Clark
Superman?
Kent. No, not that.
Oh, no.
I actually think we get a good amount of that. But he's basically playing, you know, a more open Clark Kent, because we mostly only see him with his family. We don't really see the Clark Kent facade all that much, so I don't get to see much of that differentiation between him and Superman. Which we saw a little bit about that when he was in Supergirl. And I did like, but I would like to see a little bit more. Put them in more situations where he's got that opportunity to be that more Metropolis type Clark.
Yeah, we need more Metropolis.
But anyway, today we are talking about something DC related, although it's a DC book, and it's connected to something that was part of the DC universe, but it's
Vertigo
book. Yeah. So Vertigo did this thing back when Vertigo first started. It was kind of taking these little known concepts or trademarks and just putting new spins on them. So that's how we got Gaiman's Sandman. And there were a bunch of other ones too. Kid Eternity was one of them. And some of them were tied to continuity, some were not, like Animal Man and Doom Patrol from Grant Morrison. And this was one of those ones, which it's funny because this came about much after all that other stuff started. This came out in the early 2000s when by the time Vertigo got into like maybe getting into the mid 90s, they had drifted away from doing that, going back to old concepts, and it was just purely original creator-owned concepts. So it was kind of surprising to see them take an old concept and dust it off and use it here. And that's The Losers. And it was written by Andy Diggle and drawn by Jock. And
who would go on to create some of the best DC works, in my opinion. Like,
oh, really?
I mean, Andy Diggle wrote Green Arrow Year One, which which Arrow, the show, adapted a lot from. And then Jacques, as an artist, went on and created the Batman Who Laughed, the artwork of that.
Oh, I didn't realize he was the creator on that. Oh, wow. Okay.
Essentially, yeah, like he created that concept of a character. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Because
I didn't know
the
that.
drawing and stuff, concept art.
So yeah, and then they came out with the movie so this comic is called The Losers, and they released the movie in 2010, which has a really interesting cast of future comic book movie actors.
Yeah. So I like came to the realization after this rewatch of like, this is the movie of like that had to fail in order to bring so much it to cinematic history, pop culture history, because without this movie failing, which, you know, of course it is, I that's another reason why I chose it, because for me it's underrated. But if this movie did not fail, then we wouldn't have gotten Chris Evans' Captain America, which came out a year after this movie.
Right.
we wouldn't have got probably not gotten Zoe Saldana as Gamora. We wouldn't have gotten an incredible run of Negan before they kind of like hampered him in the series. But yeah, in Walking Dead, and just like there's just so much. This is like the what if movie I think of MCU. I think it's definitely one of the movies like of that aren't directly connected, or that have kind of like had their own like impression on the MCU without having a direct impression. Like you could say like, you know, X-Men with all of Kevin Feige's like involvement on that, and that being his first movie, kind of that spurring this. I think this movie with it spurred like randomly all these MCU actors to go on and do incredible work in the MCU.
Yeah, and Idris Elba as well.
Idris Elba
went on to be Heimdall in the MCU, and then also now in the DC stuff as Bloodsport too. And yeah, it's funny because Chris Evans, I didn't realize until I'd done another movie recently called Push, and I didn't realize until I'd done that movie just how many comic book movies he was in, or comic book-esque movies he was involved in, up until he finally hit it right with Captain America. Just he was he really wanted to be in some comic book movies.
But and also that's one of the things that like rewatch, he's always been one of my favorite parts of the movie. But rewatching now, I'm like, man, Chris Evans would have been a really good Deadpool as well. Like his comedic chops,
he's
like, got not many people know that.
And
especially like, you know, like if you didn't see Not Another Teen Movie, which is kind of like a cult classic as well.
Underrated as well. That it's funny because my first introduction to Chris Evans was through these more comedic roles, like you know, Johnny Storm, the Fantastic Four, like Not Another Teen Movie, like this. So when he was cast to play Captain America, I wasn't sure if he could be serious enough to play that part. And he's really impressed me in the time since he got cast as Captain America, not only with the MCU stuff, but with other movies he's done as well, like Snowpiercer or Gifted, and just like showing how much of a range he is and just what a talented actor he really is.
Like recently, I know, I don't know, it's gotten a mixed bags of reviews, but I really enjoyed The Gray Man. Like, and him in it is like, that's the awesome thing about him in his post MCU lifetime, I guess, or career, you could say, is that he's taking these roles that so go against the grain of like of Captain America, and so like him in The Gray Man is like the complete opposite of Captain America, and is like just cocky and asshole, and just like you like see like hate him, but he's like so entertaining. So, yeah.
He's one of those actors who he could have very easily gone into like a coasting mode. Like he could have done like a George Clooney type of thing, or Ryan Reynolds to a certain extent, or Tom Cruise, where he just kind of plays the same, you know, affable character over and over again. And he could have done that, and those guys also are also really talented. Like they can do more stuff, but they've chosen to go a different direction, and that's fine. That's the decision. So it's really cool to see that he really, I get the impression just from what I've seen, the interviews of him and like the roles he's chosen, like he really likes to challenge himself as an actor. Like he really seems to, he doesn't seem to care about fame as much as he does about, you know, about the actual craft of it. And I think that's really admirable.
Yeah.
Now, have you ever read the Losers comic book?
I've always meant to, and even after this, I'm like, dang, I love Jacques' artwork. It's so like unique and stuff like that, and I really did love the how they utilize that artwork, and like essentially like recreated like what I'm assuming are like really iconic panels of that series, and like used it essentially as their like cut screens and integrating it in this movie. So yeah, I've been meaning to. And I don't know if you have.
I've read. In fact, I was introduced to I read the comic before I actually watched the movie. So, cool. And it's interesting. This is one of those really kind of weird movies that it takes so much visual cues from the comics, but it changes almost everything else about it. Like it's so like it really leans heavily into the humorous aspects of this, and almost and as much as I enjoy this movie, it is almost a bit of a detriment because I think they kind of overplay the humor a little bit. If you're comparing it to the comic book, it's a fun movie, but I did find myself, kind of missing the depth that was the like the gray areas that they get into in the espionage world in the comics. So that kind of stuff was a little bit disappointing on rewatch, but it's still a fun movie regardless.
Yeah, and I'm sure like that's why like at the end of this I'm like, oh, they really teed it up for this to become a franchise, because like, you have like that thing, and I'm sure that would have all like been further explored in further movies, and this movie was very much feels like an introduction, like laying the groundwork kind of thing. And then the one of the reasons why I believe that this movie didn't do as well when it first came out was that it came out I think like it came out very, very closely to the A-Team movie.
Yes, in fact,
like a lot.
That summer, it was like the summer of like mercenary team movies, because you had this, you had the A-Team, and you also had the Expendables, which I believe came out that same summer too.
So but this one was like weeks apart. That's the thing that like definitely deterred, I think. And then I know A-Team's a lot more of like a well-known name and stuff like that. So I'm sure that kind of like got more flocking of
audience. But even that didn't do very well, because that was another one that,
because it wasn't a good movie.
Really, you didn't like the A-Team?
It's okay, but I prefer the Losers compared to the A-Team. Yeah,
I'm not sure which one I would prefer, but I enjoyed them both. But the Expendables was really the one that kind of won that battle that summer.
Yeah,
and it went on to become a franchise. But one of the biggest disappointments in this was how they handled Max, because Max in this movie, he's just very much a
asshole,
very much an asshole, but very one-dimensional character. In the comics, Max is not one person. He's actually a pair of identical twins.
Ooh.
And there's a lot more stuff that is there's a lot more reason behind why they're doing what they're doing. It has a lot of commentary on like American foreign policy and all this kind of stuff. So I was really kind of disappointed that we don't get that kind of stuff here, but it's much more just, generic supervillain type of thing.
Yeah. It's very much of the time, I would say. I mean, Max as a villain very much felt like that late 2000s, early 10s kind of like villain in an action movie. Whereas I think that if they were to do this movie over in nowadays with the impression that MCU has done, and like just turning like having some of the best villain outings of all time, I think Max would definitely like, and those nuances would be a lot more subtle and casual instead of like over the top, because he is like over the top in his own way, like without not flamboyancy, but he is over the top in his assholery, you could say.
Well, also Aisha is the other one who had like probably the biggest changes to her character, because Aisha in this movie, it's basically just Zoe Saldana.
Yeah, it's Colombiana too.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and in the comics, she's a completely different character. She's she's like emotionless. She's borderline psychotic. And while some part of me likes the way that Saldana was able to humanize her a little bit more, I also feel like maybe they went too far in the other direction at times.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely kind of like having her as like a mixture of like it's more of like a Bond girl in a way, like a current Bond girl, not old Bond girl, but like a current Bond girl of like, like kind of like a little femme fatale mixed in with like she has her own secrets that she's keeping and things like that. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And I think the biggest weakness is just the Losers was a decent run of comic books. It was like, I think it was 32 issues or something like that.
Oh, really? Just so
yeah.
it's kind of short. Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't that
Yeah.
long. It was like Diggle and Jock, they had planned it to be like about 3 years, and that's about how long it lasted.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and from beginning to end, it was very well done. And I think there's too much story in that book to really fit into one movie. And I think if you're gonna adapt something like The Losers effectively, it should really be like an HBO series or something.
Yeah, definitely in this day and age. Like, I really do hope that, like, especially like I do want to go back to read that series, and that's why I think like the best not just comic book but also like TV series is are when they have like a short, they're not fluffing it up the material, or if trying to do filler kind of things.
Right.
It is a very concise series, like beginning to end, that's all you need and stuff like that. And so so definitely, and which is more common in this day and age with limited series, or even just like a few seasons, like for example, one of my favorite comic book series of all time, the Umbrella Academy, and their interpretation on Netflix. They just announced that kind of bittersweetly for me. It's a fourth and final season, but for me, I'm like, it's like I would love more because I'm just such a fan of the Umbrella Academy. But it is definitely like you could already see, like especially with the end of the third season, like the end is coming. I think and then it's like it's really nice when you get creators like interpretation. That's all they needed. That's all they're saying. Like, it's done. Like famously recently is Damian Lindelof's Watchmen.
Yes, yeah.
And like, which is like an incredible series, and you do want more, but David Lindelof's like, no, I'm not. I've told my story and stuff like that. And so it's like that's something that definitely could work for The Losers. And
absolutely, yeah. But so along that lines too, there is such a thing about overstaying your welcome. Like, and I'll use the Flash as an example of this, because
that's what I was about to say. Going back to the Arrowverse.
Yeah, I mean that was my for a time that was like the crown jewel of the Arrowverse for me. Like I ended up liking that more than Arrow. And then after Crisis, it was a little bit before Crisis, it started kind of, losing some gas in the tank. But then after Crisis, it really kind of took a nosedive. And just like the last 2 seasons, I was struggling to finish watching them on Netflix.
Yeah. Unfortunately, like I haven't watched them because they kind of like, especially with the loss of Arrow, I think too, and that interconnection is. But it is just kind of. It sucks when things overstay the welcome, and I think in our day and age now, that is something that shows can't get away with anymore. Like we're so on fast times, kind of thing that that's why like I'm so, and it's something that I've been like preaching like from the rooftops almost like for years and because of the what's happening in the Arrowverse and essentially like these seasons need to be shorter. They need to be concise. Like it's good, you're hurting yourself with adding all these episodes and stuff like that, and that's what is becoming the precedent now is shorter seasons, conciseness. Like the Disney Plus shows, like
that's exactly the example I was going to use.
And then but there's the exceptions to the rules, of course. Like we are going to get what is it, how many episodes, like 13 12 episodes of Daredevil, but for everybody like is like, no, that's okay.
That's also keeping with, I mean, it also depends on the show, because some shows like, because going back to Superman and Lois, that's about like what, 15 episodes.
It's short, a season.
So it's a little bit, it's not like 6 to 10 episodes, but it's not 22. So they kind of find the right target for each of these shows. And Daredevil is a good example of, I mean, with the Netflix show, I think some of the middle episodes did feel a bit superfluous, but I think having about like 10 episodes is a good length for Daredevil. And because especially if you're going to be doing these shows that are focused more on season-long arcs, and you're not going to have these kind of, standalone episodes, then you should really keep it as short as possible.
Yeah.
You also don't want to run into a situation like with, I think, of Arrested Development, where it ends and then it comes back, and like almost from the second it comes back, it's already overstayed its welcome.
Yeah. Well, another example, we're going to be going back to all of our examples again, but another one is Scrubs for sure.
Yeah.
Like, it ended. That's my true ending. I'm like the ending of, I think it's like season
8, I think it was
8. Yeah. Is like that. That ending like is the first like episode of television that made me bawl my eyes out. I remember the moment I was in front of the computer torrenting it. Sorry. I do pay for all my streaming now. But like just bawling my eyes out, and then it came back, overstated. It's like, what's this kind of thing?
It was actually Bill Lawrence actually wanted that to be a spinoff. And then, and then the studio forced him to just make it a continuation.
Yeah.
And as a spinoff, it's actually not as bad as people remember. I think as a spinoff, it's fine.
No, it's not that bad. But it being another season of Scrubs,
right?
Is
So let's go back to The Losers. What were some things that you really enjoyed about this movie?
I just enjoy, like, Phil. So when I originally watched it, I just enjoyed, like I'm really a sucker for like a heist movie or something along those lines. I love the original like Ocean's movies and stuff. And then so this one's kind of like felt like that. I mean, and then like a Team Scorn burned. I think this is the same time that Burn Notice came out, and I love Burn Notice as well. And so it was definitely that kind of thing. It's because of what what they went on to do. I love this movie a little bit more because of just the ironic things that happen in this movie that like they would never have known would become ironic like later on. Like the movie opens with a voiceover with Chris Evans, but then it's a voiceover over first looking at the star of an American flag and then zooming out, and it's like this is like perfect. This is perfect for Chris Evans to be doing a voiceover over American flag. And then and then also going, it's like all the connections are with the Jensen character, with Chris Evans' character, because then he goes on and says like
the government experiment type of thing.
Yeah, he's a secret government experiment, and I'm like, perfect. So the world changing and all that kind of like made me like this movie a lot. And I do recognize it has shortcomings and stuff like that. It is very much a cult movie. I just like I felt like this is a perfect movie for this podcast, because especially like, since you like talked about the spirit, I was like, oh yeah, this fits right there in that. But and like just the camaraderie of these characters as well. Like you from the beginning, you get like this is a tight-knit group team. Like they are essentially brothers and stuff like that, and they always are like caring for each other. They mess up sometimes with each other, specifically with Jeffrey Dean Morgan, like always sleeping with the girl. But overall, like they are family, and that's why when Idris Elba's character betrays them, you just like feel it, because it's like, oh my gosh, how could like one of their own like betray them and stuff. So yeah.
In fact, that's one of the things I did like about one of the changes I did like, is because in the comic, basically from the first page, it's pretty obvious that Roke's going to betray the team. And this one, and I think a big part of it just has to do with Elba's performance, is just it feels more like a betrayal, almost to the point where the betrayal almost feels a little tacked on. It feels almost a little too out of character with how well they establish his relationship with Clay and with the rest of the group. So when he betrays them, I almost feel like, again, this is a kind of a situation like with Aisha, where I think they went a little bit too far in the opposite direction, where I think they felt that Roke had to betray the team because that's what happened in the comics. And
I think there was enough for me at least. I feel like there was enough groundwork there. I mean, I think it just takes just one, like he mentions like I've been by your side for so long and stuff like that. And I warned you essentially that bad things would happen and we should have just gone back to our lives and stuff like that. And like he doesn't listen. And I think it's just like you see subtle, it's like I've done in a little bit more subtle way. I know that like I'm sure like in the comics it's especially with it being just 32 issues, like you have to be there like at the top. But I think when things get interpreted into live action, like you could express that a little bit more subtly.
I think that's one of the issues I had with his betrayal is just it's another example of that this movie tried to put too much story into this one installment. I think the betrayal would have worked a lot better if it had been saved for a sequel. But it seems it's a weird thing because it feels like they thought they had the potential to keep this going as a franchise.
Oh no, definitely. Yeah.
But they were nervous that they wouldn't have that chance. So it's like this weird mix of confidence and a lack of confidence.
Yeah. It's like the natural instinct of a nerd themselves.
Right. But I understand and I think they did too good a job of establishing he has these connections with the other characters because by the time he betrays, I mean, yeah, they did have that whole thing with him getting frustrated with Clay, and I understood all of that. But his relationships with like Pooch were so strong that I felt that, when he betrays them to Max, he knows he's basically giving them a death sentence. So I felt like they had done too good a job of establishing his personal connections to make that believable enough for me.
Yeah, I could see that. And I think like I think it's a way that it would have paid off a little bit better if he had a little bit more sorrowfulness in like the scenes and after the betrayal instead of like I'm getting my money and or stuff like that. Or right. I could definitely see that.
Which is why the betrayal made a lot of sense in the comics because he was basically only interested in the money the whole time. So it totally made sense why he would betray the team.
Yeah. And I think that's like how it somewhat had remembered it before. I think I remember just like filling in the blanks. Like I think before yesterday when I rewatched it, I hadn't watched the movie in like maybe 5 years or 7 years. And so so I think like I had kind of like filled into my mind like, oh yeah, he's like somewhat sorrowful like afterwards because it's like a big betrayal. But yeah, I could see where your point is and stuff.
Yeah, not sorrowful enough was my biggest thing about that. One of the things, like, even though I had issues with Jason Patric's performance, I did, for the most part, think he was entertaining on screen. He was very flat as a character, but at least he's entertaining while he's being flat.
Yeah, I feel like there was a lot of I have to go back to the DVD, but I feel like there was a lot of deleted scenes with him because there's like things that I'm sure that the hand has to tie into something like that was going to be reintroduced in the sequel and stuff like that. But I feel like that could have been added. We could have. I think they were like you going back to how you were saying like they kind of like threw like it was like a 1 foot in 1 foot out kind of or 2 feet in 1 foot out kind of situation where they might have been trying to keep him as like this shady figure but then also be direct as well. Going back to like the A-Team and Patrick Wilson as like essentially the same kind of character in this like I feel like maybe that one had a little bit more like you know the character that you're getting like right at the beginning of like when he's introduced he's an asshole and stuff like that, but he's like I think that paid off a little bit more because like he's front and center in the eyes of the team from like the first scene of that movie, whereas this like they get introduced to him like fairly later in the movie, whereas like I think if they kept him more shaded and like as the shadow man essentially he might have had a little bit more of like a nuance to him that you didn't even need that much information on him, but by making him a face essentially, having a face to the voice, like for the audience, I guess, like you want more. He should have more context in because of that. So yeah.
I think one of the best things about Jason Patric is the scenes he has with Holt McCallany, who plays Wade.
Yeah.
Like that, like, and I love how Wade is not this typical henchman, right? It's almost like they have this weird twisted kind of friendship almost.
Yeah. I mean, that's why they have some really good lines in this movie. Like I feel like overall, like it's like a kind of like strong script of a movie because of these like nuanced scenes. Like the whole him riding in a pedicab talking to Max and like oh you're gonna either have to kill him or you're gonna have to just fire them. And he's like, oh, I can't kill them, like one of them is my I'm related to one of them.
One of them is my brother-in-law.
And he's like, well, you told them. He's like, I said I will kill them. Kind of thing. It's just so that just kills me. Then the delivery for those scenes are pretty good, except for the whole like him saying it 3 times. I'm like, you should have just left it.
That was when I'm like, okay, now you're pushing it.
Yeah.
I did that. Yeah, that exchange, that like 3 times thing, that got on my nerves. But other than that scene, I think overall I love their introduction. Like when he says, when he gives him the nod and then Wade throws the guy off the roof and he's like, why'd you do that? Yes,
I love that scene. Yeah, it's just you give me the nod. It's such like, it's because that's why that's one of my favorite versions of like those kind of villains is like it's just a casual. They're just casually they're just casually a villain, that's who they are. Like they that's their everyday life. And which is like like some like villains like in real life, like that's their everyday life.
As one-dimensional as Max is as a character, those moments with Wade give him at least some kind of a humanizing quality, because it's like, oh well, they're 2 guys who work together, and that really comes through. Like I get the sense from their relationship and their interactions that they've been working these ops for a long time. Just like I get the sense with the losers that, like with that scene in the cemetery where they're talking about Clay's exes, where it really gives you a sense that these characters have an existing relationship. Because sometimes some of these movies, you watch it and it's like, okay, I know the movie tells us that they've got this existing relationship, but I don't really believe it. This one is not that case. Like I really believe that these characters have been working together for a long time on both sides.
Yeah.
And in that aspect, as much as I think they did go a little bit too far with taking Aisha's character away from what she was in the comic books, I did also think it made it. I understand the logic behind it. Well, I mean, first off, you've got Zoe Saldana, and this kind of character better suits her personality, her acting style. But more than that, I felt that it, her having that more friendly side really helped engender her with the rest of the group. I think it would have been a lot harder with the way these characters play off each other for her to have been the hardcore assassin she was in the comics and still have that same kind of relationship that she establishes with the other characters.
Yeah, this movie, like going back, definitely felt like and like I don't know if it contributed to, but definitely felt an audition for Gamora as a character, especially with like how she joins the group. Very much how her character in Guardians joined the group with this whole kind of like mishmash, and like we just need to get this job done and stuff like that.
Right.
Then they form this group. And yeah, like it definitely adds a lot more personality to the story. I mean, like her and Clay's fight, I like got a kick. You get a kick out of that, like with them like stretching, like they know they're gonna fight. Like it's just it's a very like fun way to kind of like show the interaction between these like 2 people and their initial like, yeah, I don't trust you. I know this. Like it also like tells like their experience as well in a subtle way of like, yeah, we've played this game our whole lives. Like we know that you don't trust me, I don't trust you, we're gonna fight.
Yeah, and I also want to give special nod to Oscar Hayanada. I'm probably mispronouncing his name. Hayanada.
Cooper.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the guy who
the
plays
man
Cougar.
that has the best line in Pirates on Stranger Tides.
Oh, really? He was in that? I didn't realize that.
Yeah, he's the Spaniard that's like trying to destroy the Fountain of Youth.
Oh, okay.
And he comes in, because he's like, this land is unholy, like, and stuff like that. And then a British guy comes up, he's like, we claim this land for the British, and he just grabs a pistol, shoots him dead, and he's like, make a note that man died bravely for his country. and like it's just the hardcore like moment in that movie. And yeah, that's him.
He's got one of the best lines in this movie too, when Pooch tells him, like, if we do this, we'll be going to war with the CIA. And Cougar just says, well, they started it.
Yeah,
and he, I think more than anyone, he perfectly embodies the character from the comics. Just like Cougar's got that kind of cool stoicism all throughout the comics, and they really do a good job of he really does a good job of embodying that here. More than anyone else, he really looks the part, I think, too. Like all they did a really good job. They definitely had an eye for appearance when they were casting all these characters. But I think Hayanada, more than any others, he totally fits that. He completely perfectly embodies that character from the comics.
Yeah.
And I like we get this, and I like the way that they are able to establish this relationship between him and Jensen, even though they don't really talk a lot, right? But we get a sense that they've got this camaraderie right from the start because of that.
Yeah, I think you get a camaraderie feeling of like what I'd say like the back half of the team, which is like Pooch, Jensen, and Cougar. Of yeah, like I mean, just that's why like they feel very much like, I guess, like where all of them feel like brothers. They're like maybe the triplets and stuff, because like the whole interaction with like him getting with Pooch getting his leg shot, and they're like, can you stand that? He's like, I've been hit into both of my legs, and he's like, what? Well, that doesn't answer my question. And so it's like, it's very much like a brotherly kind of thing, and yeah, you get that off just straight from the back. Love that whole interaction with Jensen and Cougar with him knowing that he has his back and stuff, and like shooting the guys and stuff, and just like thank you kind of thing.
Yeah,
like, yeah,
that is one of the best moments in the movie too. And I think maybe Chris Evans probably walks away as my favorite character in this movie.
The whole petunias thing is like so incredible, like of adding that in. He's like, yeah, it's my niece's soccer team. Like they're 5-2. Like they're going to the and then the reveal of the marigolds, and then him like, yeah, like, I love it. Yeah.
My only issue with the petunias things, I think they pushed it too far when they had the soccer game at the end.
Oh, I thought it was perfect. I thought it was just like kind of because like it's a showing of like they kind of like have gotten their lives back in some sort of way and stuff like that. They might still like be underground, but it's very much like they could kind of get away with these kind of like outings and stuff. And so, and yeah, the whole, and it's kind of like a little further showing of the team and the camaraderie kind of like growing with like, who did you bet? Like who'd you bet on a kid's soccer game? He's like, she's like, I did. And he's like, why? He gave me points and stuff like that. It's just, yeah.
That was a fun line. I'm torn on that. I feel like that the soccer team scene, it kind of undercuts the conclusion of the movie for me, but at the same time, it is you got a point there. It is a fun scene at the same time. But yeah, I mean, Evan's just so good. Like I love like all the interactions he has with everybody. His little one-liners throughout this, and
in the warehouse, like he's like nice, and that was like the moments I was like, he would have been a good Deadpool as well. Yeah.
Yeah, he could have done that. Yeah. Any other things you really wanted to mention about this movie?
I'm just like trying to think. It's just like the whole nuance of like, how, like I said at the top of this episode, like how much this how important it was that this in the history of comic book movies that this movie had to fail, kind of thing. Just looking back on it, and like while it might not have deserved to fail in my opinion, but it's like I'm kind of like it's a bittersweet. Yeah, it's a bittersweet thing that
it would have been interesting
kind of
if this had been successful. It does make you wonder what would have happened to how the careers of some of these actors might have gone in a different direction. You might have had, Jeffrey Dean Morgan may have had, more movie roles as a result of if it had been more successful. Whereas, Evans and Saldana may not have gone on to do the MCU. Or at least maybe not have had as big a commitment to the MCU as they ended up having.
Idris Elba as well. Yeah. And then maybe like and then also like going back to like this movie very much feels like the Suicide Squad as well in that instance. And so like it's like kind of like it's cool to see that Idris Elba got to like kind of interact in this kind of like situation a little bit later on as well.
Oh well, I mean the Suicide Squad comparison is very apt because there is a lot more death in the comics. That's all. I'll just leave it at that.
Oh yeah.
But I think one of the things that really kind of as much fun as I like as this movie is, I think one of the things that was disappointing is the lack of teeth when it comes to criticizing American foreign policy, because that was one of the things that I thought was done so brilliantly and pretty bravely for that time period, because this came out in the early 2000s in the comics. And right smack dab in the middle of the war on terror and all that kind of shit. And so for that comic at that time to have been so brazen in its criticism of American foreign policy, I think was a pretty ballsy move. And I was a little disappointed that this movie just kind of it more or less paints Max as kind of like an outlier. He's not speaking for the government so much. He's using the government, but he's doing it for his own purposes.
Yeah. I feel very much like it's easier to get away with in a comic, which like is not really on the radar of foreign policy people,
right?
Than an actual movie is, unfortunately. But then again, I think that in this day and age now, like it is a movie that, like I said earlier, like if it has a series or another movie, would I think be allowed to carry more clout in its
absolutely
source, in its delivery as well. So definitely, like I like the way that you're pitching it, and like how I'm hoping to go check out the comic. I'm sure it's going to be like, this could be made into a series like easily in this day and age and be accepted. I mean, with the things like The Boys, I mean, like just that alone is like such a like has become so somewhat unbrazen in its like delivery of like corporations and all that kind of thing. So like
absolutely,
it would definitely be a welcome thing.
Something like Succession as well, another one that just goes full teeth bared type of situation. And I think if you got some people like that who were confident enough to take the criticism that would inevitably come, to do a series like The Losers, I think would be amazing if they were able to do that on something like HBO or Netflix or Amazon or something like that.
Hoping, I don't know, because I'm just so worried about the Warner stuff. Like I'm like, it's a Warner Brothers property still.
I mean, I keep saying HBO because that's where they've done so much of this stuff, but at the same time, I don't know what's going to happen now. Well, that too.
It could be Netflix DC. Though, because Sandman.
Right.
Sandman's DC too.
Yeah.
So fingers crossed.
Sandman, I'm not sure what the right situation is with The Losers. I know Sandman's got a unique position because Gaiman owns a big portion of the rights.
God.
So it's a little bit of a, because he had used
Gaiman's kind of like,
they got and plus he's such a big name that he's got a lot of pull. I'm not sure what the right situation is with this, because it's mostly they just took the concept and the name from the original DC comic, and then everything else is new. So I'm not quite sure what the right situation is with Dingle and Jock and DC on this.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I would think that would be a little bit more tied up in DC just because like what Diggle and Jock went on to do for
Mhm.
DC, and they're so tied into um DC Comics and stuff like that. So we'll see. We'll have to see. I mean, like it is an ever changing on the daily when
Mhm.
it comes to DC. I mean, when it comes to Warner Brothers nowadays, like I'm just like anything could happen.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
why I'm worried about. But also, like maybe it will be for the better. So yeah.
Although interesting too with the DC with the Suicide Squad comparisons is that after Diggle did the Losers, he ended up doing Thunderbolts for Marvel at a time when it was much more of a Suicide Squad Black Ops type focus to it.
Yeah. Which
So,
will probably be seen.
Which will probably,
anyways.
which is probably what they're going to do with the MCU, because I think it'd be too difficult for them to do the reformed villains aspect of it because there just aren't enough villains that are still running around.
It'll be like a reformed villain. I mean, we get like the lineup has kind of like sounded like like villain, and not even villainess. It's just gonna be a team that was like, yeah. I think it's not gonna be like full villain. There'll be some villains will be
Right.
Maj Podge, but yeah.
Right. I feel like it's going to be very similar to the Suicide Squad.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think final thoughts about this. It's a decent enough movie. It's fun. It is a lot of fun. I will, and if you think too much about it, you can find holes in it to poke into it. But and I'm kind of doing that. I know I'm guilty of doing that here because I am thinking about it with a bit more of an analytical eye for the show and everything. But for the most part, when I watch this movie, and I've watched it several times, like when I watch this movie, I put it on and I turn off my brain for an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And
which is what it's what's when is the best way to enjoy any movie. I think.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is a pure summer popcorn film. It's exactly what it's made for.
Yep.
And it's got great action. It's got the performances are fun. And great music too. We didn't mention that.
Yes. I like was thinking like during my watch. I'm like, this has like a really good soundtrack. Yeah.
Yeah, and really good selection and music that's kind of timeless. It fits. It's like it's not timeless music necessarily, but it gives it almost a timeless quality to this. It's music that can be enjoyed years later. I think like we're not going to be, because I think, for example, you watch some of the other, I'm thinking of some of the other Marvel movies that came out in the early 2000s when they had like all the like Daredevil and the Punisher, when they had like all the new metal band type of things that seem really dated when you watch those movies now.
Well, except for
go ahead.
I'm a alt rock. I'm eclectic in my music, but I come from that era of alt rock, emo, punk. So I'm like, I still listen to it. But,
I mean, I'm not knocking the music, but I feel like it's very. If those
definitely.
movies were made in a different time, they would not have used that same music.
True. I mean, like, yeah, like Evanescence, like while it is still a banger, it's definitely like this was a choice.
Yeah,
especially with punching or stabbing sandbags.
Yeah. Whereas this, they had a really good selection of different songs. Like they used Journey to great effect in this movie. Like I think that whole scene in the building when he's jamming out to Journey and then it's playing as he's running out, I thought that was so perfectly executed.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just timeless 80s music.
Okay, Ariel, anything else you want to say about this?
No, just like I mean, if you haven't watched it, go and watch it. It's such a like I said, or you said, like it's such a fun movie to watch. Kind of like bask in the young versions of these actors that are now in MCU and all other different types of properties, and kind of like you get a little nostalgia from that as well. But yeah,
I also say that if you have read the comic and if you're a fan of the comic, separate them in your mind, right? A good comparison, there are two things I would compare this to. One is the Lucifer TV show, the other is the Constantine movie with Keanu Reeves. Both of them are entertaining, good, and fun in their own way, but they're not really good adaptations of the comics.
Oh,
they're
in
based
that
on.
yeah sense. Yes, yeah.
So
For sure.
think about this in that vein. Like it's a fun movie, but you have to separate it from the comic book.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you want to tell people where they can find you?
Yeah. You could reach out to the Undercast Company on our social medias. We're on all the main social medias: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and yeah. And then we also have a Patreon that you could check out. And then, like I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, like I have another podcast called You've Never Seen ? Exclamation point. That you could check out. We have our flag tentpole. There we go. Tentpole podcast of underrated podcasts. Derek, who was a previous guest on this podcast, has a podcast called Gateway Episodes. And then also we sometimes collaborate and do a Marvel podcast called Infinity Stones and Dragon Bones, where we discuss whatever Marvel project or thing in the MCU has popped up.
In fact, he's already asked me to be on that for when Black Panther comes out.
Oh, cool. Yeah. And so yeah, like just come join our nerdiness as well. Discord and all that. Links to all of that are in all of the letterhead of our social media.
Okay, we'll have those links in the show notes as well. So, but thanks so much for coming on, and yeah, anytime you want to come back on, just let me know.
Oh yeah, sounds good. Yeah, there's a lot to things that I was like kind of thinking of, like what things should we talk about and stuff. So definitely I have a few other ideas.
Okay, sounds good. All right, that does it for this episode of Superhero Cinephiles. The website is superherocinephiles.com, and we are Super Cinema Pod on Twitter and Instagram. And remember, if you sign up for the Patreon, you get bonus episodes of the Superhero Cinephiles Book Club, where we talk about comic books and graphic novels and all that. And you also get these episodes a week in advance, and that's for as little as $1 a month. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. If you enjoy the Superhero Cinephiles, then you'll also love my companion podcast, the Superhero Cinephiles Book Club. All my Patreon subscribers get access to this exclusive podcast where I review superhero comics and graphic novels. Not sure what comics you want to read next or what you should dive into? I've got you covered on that. I'll be doing reviews, recommendations, and also talking to you about useful entry points if you're interested in reading some comics but don't know where you should start. Plus, you'll get access to all episodes of the main show a week before everyone else. On all of this for as little as just $1 a month. All you have to do is go to patreon.com/supercinemapod, and you can sign up at any subscription amount to get started. Thanks so much for your support, and please don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you for listening. And as always, good night, good evening. God bless.